address with you during our time. We look forward to your testimony. At the top of the list is addressing the threat of the Islamic State and terrorists affiliated with ISIL. As Egypt, Jordan, and the Kurds in Iraq are retaliating and defending themselves against the group's heinous acts, security assistance is being delayed by bureaucratic processes across many agencies and poor policy decisions by this administration. As a result, our most trusted and capable partners in the region are not getting the help they need. Mr. Secretary, there are no excuses for this delay. I know that this delay is not your responsibility alone, and I voiced my concerns directly to the President, as you know. Our allies and partners in the Middle East must get the help they need now to combat ISIL, not next week, next month, and not next year. In Ukraine, violence continues despite a ceasefire that was reached almost 2 weeks ago. We want to hear your thoughts on steps being taken to resolve the situation and what assistance is needed to support the people of Ukraine and the region to combat Russian aggression. In Afghanistan, even with the new government in office and a signed bilateral security agreement, there are continued challenges, and in fact, the security environment remains so unstable that our diplomatic and development personnel are pulling back to Kabul. In Africa, Boko Haram is not back down. They're still on the offensive, committing unspeakable acts of brutality. And while there's been progress in ending the violence caused by the large resistance army, the leader of the group, Joseph Kony, remains at large. For nearly a year and a half, you've worked with our internal national partners to put in place an agreement with Iran, and the United States must keep the pressure on as a final deal is negotiated. I'm closely watching the elements of an agreement. I know many of my colleagues share my concerns. The security of the United States and our steadfast ally, Israel, is at stake. I hope you'll address each of these policy issues today. In addition, we have questions about the budget request for your department's operations and foreign assistance programs. The total funding level requested for the State Department and the USAID is 6% above last year. But even at that level, you've sacrificed some of the priorities of members of this committee to make room for the administration's initiatives. It's difficult for me to justify a new $500 million program at the United Nations to fight global climate change and additional funding for an embassy in Cuba when, once again, many programs that have bipartisan support have been reduced below last year's levels, such as democracy assistance and humanitarian programs. Another issue we'll continue to address together is ensuring the safety of our nation's diplomats. We need assurance that funding is being used effectively to address the most urgent security needs. Next, I want to mention an issue that I know is a priority for you, Middle East peace. Negotiating a peace deal requires trusted partners, and the recent actions by President Abbas at the International Criminal Court have jeopardized the trust that has been built over the years. We want to hear how you plan to respond to the Palestinians' move to join the ICC, and we question why the administration's budget request includes another $440 million for the West Bank and Gaza in light of these very troubling actions by the Palestinian leadership. Finally, I want to mention an issue that is a priority for me, a foreign policy issue in our own backyard. The administration's budget request includes $1 billion for the Central American countries, more than double the amount provided last year. Many members of this subcommittee understand the need for an increased investment in these countries to stop the flow of illegal immigration to the United States. I have myself visited these countries and the U.S.-Mexico border several times and have seen this crisis firsthand. We need your help today to understand such a large investment and how it would change the situation on our border. Our neighbor, Mexico, is on the front lines of combating these troubling patterns of immigration from Central America. We must do all we can to help Mexico strengthen its borders and turn away those traveling illegally from Central American countries. We must also support and use the capabilities of partners in the region, such as Colombia, to continue to develop and implement a comprehensive security strategy. In closing, I want to thank you and the thousands of diplomats, development officers, and implementing partners for what you do every day to promote U.S. interests abroad. You have a very difficult job, and all of the members of this subcommittee recognize that. We also know that the United States must lead in these troubling times. It's our responsibility to hold you to account for managing the funds this committee provides to address these challenges. I'll now turn to my good friend and ranking member, Mrs. Lowy, for her opening remarks.
Well, thank you to my good friend, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
And welcome. We are so delighted to welcome our extraordinary Secretary of State. But before I officially do, if I can ask for the indulgence of the Chair, I would like to acknowledge the absence of our colleague from California, Barbara Lee, who was unable to attend this important hearing today. Barbara is a longtime member of the subcommittee and an advocate of so many vital issues that we deal with in this subcommittee. As many of you know, she is not here today due to the recent passing of her mother, Mildred Parrish Massey, and I just want her to know that our thoughts and prayers are with her and her family during this difficult time. Thank you very much. Well, Secretary Kerry, welcome back. You continue to represent our country with passion, dedication, energy, strength. I really do want to thank you for your tireless efforts. Since you were sworn in 2 years ago, you have worked diligently on both Middle East peace, Iranian nuclear negotiations, faced nonstop crises in Syria, Iraq, and Ukraine, consistently worked to counter terrorism and advocate for human rights and humanitarian needs. Since the last time you testified, we have seen unspeakable atrocities committed by ISIL, terrorist attacks in the heart of Europe, multiple humanitarian disasters in Africa, devastating refugee crises even on our own southern border, anti-Semitism once again dangerously on the rise, and several countries on the brink of disintegration. Diplomacy and development are needed now more than ever to address these challenges and countless other global priorities. And again, I want to say we are fortunate to have a person of your intelligence and your caliber in this role today. Thank you. I want to start with Iran. With the negotiations underway, I hope you can update us on progress made to narrow the gaps since the last extension. We all agree we must make it impossible for Iran to make nuclear weapons, so I hope you will assure the members of this committee that any final deal will verifiably close all possible pathways to a bomb, dismantle crucial elements of Iran's current program, and ensure the IAEA access to Parchin. The final agreement must achieve these objectives. Additionally, I would like your assurances that the United States will remain in close communication with our key allies in the region during the remainder of the negotiations. I'm also very concerned about any new funding for the Palestinian Authority, given President Abbas's unilateral actions before the United Nations Security Council and the International Criminal Court. I hope you will update us on your review of U.S. assistance, which, as you know, is intentionally conditioned to discourage provocative actions that undercut the peace process. Has there been any movement at all toward renewed negotiations between the Palestinians and the Israelis? I know how hard you've worked and how committed you are to that process. Since Abbas has pursued action at the ICC, do you think it is even possible for the parties to get together to reach a deal? With regard to Ukraine, I'm pleased to see the request include strong economic and security assistance to help counter Russian aggression. At the same time, I'm very concerned about next steps should the current ceasefire unravel. This year's request also includes funding for new initiatives in Central America and Africa, as well as a multilateral fund on climate change. Yet the request reduces humanitarian and disaster assistance by $750 million compared to last year's levels. I look forward to hearing your rationale. I would also ask that you update this committee on our investments in health, women's empowerment, food security, international family planning, all of which are vital components to our foreign policy objectives of improving lives, expanding economic opportunity, and enhancing our own national security. Lastly, while an improvement over prior requests, this year's budget request again fails to prioritize international basic education. I know we agree that educated girls and boys better protect themselves from hunger, poverty, disease, and ultimately extremism. As you've heard me say before, we simply cannot build the world we want for ourselves and for future generations without education at the center of our efforts. So I thank you again for your leadership, your commitment, your extraordinary hard work, and for being here today. Thank you.
I'll now yield to Chairman Rogers for his opening statement.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Mr. Secretary, welcome back to the Hill. I admire your tenacity and your physical prowess, putting up with the long travels that you constantly are undergoing. You're serving as the nation's chief diplomat during a truly tumultuous period. Undeniably, the threat posed by ISIS demands our immediate attention. We've seen this group of terrorists senselessly kill innocent civilians and our partners and allies in the fight against ISIS, and they're stepping up threats to Western targets. ISIS brutality seemingly has no limits. The President has asked other countries to play a prominent role in dismantling ISIS, and the U.S. must support our friends and allies in this endeavor. I echo the Chairwoman's concerns that security assistance for Egypt, Jordan, and the Kurds in Iraq must be delivered with all due haste. When our allies and partners are beating back a shared foe, they should be able to count on our country to come to their aid. I fear that countries like Russia are all too eager to fill any perceived vacuum in U.S. leadership, and I hope you can address that concern today. Speaking of support for our friends in the Middle East, I look forward to hearing from you about the peace process and its impact on Israel. You've personally poured metaphorical blood, sweat, and tears into this critically important effort, working hard to create a conceptual framework for talks between Israel and the Palestinians. Unfortunately, the Palestinians have largely walked away from those talks, preferring instead to pursue unilateral actions at the United Nations and to join the International Criminal Court. We look forward to hearing what the steps next might be to get peace talks back on track. As Israel's closest ally, the United States must remain strong as nuclear talks with Iran near their conclusion. Stability in the region, which is tenuous on a good day, depends on a resolution wherein Iran is not taking any steps toward a nuclear weapons capability. The press reports that some troubling concessions may be made to Iran, despite the fact that Iran defiantly refuses to answer IAEA's long-standing questions about suspect work on nuclear weapons designs. I look forward to your thoughts about the process of these negotiations, your level of confidence that Iran will comply with the terms of any agreement that might be ultimately reached, and what actions the U.S. will take to enforce the terms of any deal. Certainly, we hope diplomacy yields results, but any deal must have teeth to be effective. Economic pressure and a credible military option should be fundamental tenets of an agreement. And finally, Mr. Secretary, I regret that we do not agree on the administration's climate change policies around the world. The President's politically driven anti-coal environmental policies have wreaked havoc domestically, sending tens of thousands of hardworking Americans to the unemployment lines and casting into question our country's long-term security, energy security. Coal exports are the one bright spot for the thousands of mining families who are facing disastrous economic conditions in my district and elsewhere. And yet administration officials will not promote coal as part of its Power Africa initiative. However, this anti-coal posture by the U.S. will not preclude emerging African governments from making use of this reliable, ubiquitous, and affordable natural resource. These emerging countries, ripe for investment, will instead turn to the Chinese for financing and technology to build the same coal-fired power plants. With China's terrible environmental record, the projects they will fund will be dirtier than if American companies were involved. At the end of the day, these policies are anti-American jobs, and they will not have the intended environmental benefits. I also have heard that the administration is encouraging members of the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development to impose stringent conditions on the public financing of overseas coal-fired power plants. As coal capture and sequestration technology is not yet commercially available, these conditions would result in a de facto ban on OECD public financing of coal plants in much of the world. For example, this plan could preclude funding for highly efficient coal plant investments in Pakistan. Given U.S. national security interests and Pakistan's role in the fight against terrorism, the U.S. should be encouraging affordable and reliable electricity that can bolster economic growth and job creation in that country, in turn reducing instability. In addition, the administration's policies have recently denied Overseas Private Investment Corporation, OPIC's, support to an important energy sector project in Ukraine. I hope you can explain how these policies are in the long-term interests of our country and our allies and partners. Ms. Secretary, thank you for taking time to be with us today. This committee takes seriously our role in overseeing the budget and policies of the department. We appreciate your continued engagement with us. Thank you, Madam Secretary.
You. Secretary Kerry, please proceed with your opening remarks. Your full written statement, of course, will be placed in the record. We're going to have another set of votes fairly soon, so I'd ask you to summarize your statement so we can try to get a full round of questions before those votes. Secretary Kerry.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much, Madam Chairwoman. Madam Ranking Member, my friend Neil Lowy, Mr. Chairman of the full committee, Al Rogers, thank you very much. I appreciate the enormously generous welcome from all of you, and I particularly appreciate the opportunity to be able to be here. I think we have some of the best dialogue on the Hill in this committee, and I always appreciate the chance to share thoughts with you, and that's what I want to do. This is not a, this is not a combat. This is really a way to find mutual understanding about the nation's priorities. Historically, we have always said that politics should end at the water's edge when it comes to American foreign policy, and what we're here is to find the common ground with respect to our interests and our values as we project them in the context of foreign policy. And that's what foreign policy is. It is the best enhancement of that combination, our values, our interests. There's always a balance. Sometimes one takes a little more precedence than the other, and people are uncomfortable one way or the other. But that's the objective, and in the end, it is to keep the American people safe and keep our country strong. You have all laid out a broad array of issues, which I couldn't begin, obviously, in just an opening comment to address. So I'm going to leave them aside for a minute and honor the notion that you do have a few votes coming quickly, and we want to really have the dialogue I talked about. So I'm going to give a very, very short summary. We're here to talk about 1% of the budget, 1% of the entire federal budget. That's what we put into foreign policy. Between USAID and the State Department in our general operations, you're talking about $50.3 billion. And that 1%, my friends, I promise you, will account for more than 50% of the history of this era when it's written. So I personally believe it ought to be much bigger than 1%. And I think we have very justifiable reasons for making it so. That's not the budget we have in front of us and that we're arguing about here today, but I ask you to keep that in the forefront of your minds as you think about all of these priorities. Because we are robbing Peter to pay Paul right now. We are cannibalizing some programs, you've mentioned it yourself, to do other things that we need to do that are priorities. And I don't think in the end that serves America as well as we should be. I don't think, excuse me, I don't, I think that the richest country on the face of the planet, which has significantly reduced its deficit, can examine its priorities without a sort of rote, automatic process of sequestration or otherwise, by which we limit real choices. And I just want to start with that. Secondly, I will say to you very quickly that this is as complicated a time as, in many ways, we've ever faced. Because the world has changed so dramatically in the last 20 years. Everybody is connected to everybody all the time. The numbers of cell phones in even poor countries is staggering. And the degree to which people know what other people have affects what they want. Aspirations are burgeoning in all kinds of places that it was never allowed to even be thought of historically. So in the Middle East, in the Sahel, in the Maghreb, in the Arabian Peninsula, in South Central Asia and Asia, I mean, countless places, there are pressures being released that are changing the dynamics of foreign policy. In many ways, we're looking at a world where states are behaving in the ways, and within the states, all kinds of different entities behaving independently with their own agenda, unlike the sort of clarity that seemed to define the differences in the course of the Cold War, communism, freedom, democracy, et cetera. And we know that in many dictatorships, many of these kinds of aspirations were tampened down through tyranny and oppression, but tampened down. So we didn't have to cope with them. Now we do. It is counterintuitive, but the truth is that notwithstanding the threat of ISIL, notwithstanding people being beheaded publicly and burned publicly and the atrocities that they are perpetrating, and it is a serious, serious challenge to us, notwithstanding that, there is actually less threat and less probability of people dying in some sort of violent conflict today than at any time in human history. And with advances of health and with advances of statehood and other kinds of things, we're living in a very different world. I'm not going to go into all of that now. I just want to end my quick opening by saying to you this. I am proud of the way President Obama and this administration are, in fact, leading on issue after issue after issue. And while some may disagree with the choice that is made, and some may feel that not enough was done in Libya or Syria or in some particular place, I'm telling you that never before in our history have so many crises and so many trouble spots and so many larger policy challenges been managed simultaneously, and I think have been kept on a track as much as they are today. And I'll be specific. In ISIL, we built a global coalition that has Arab countries actually flying sorties against Arab countries in the Gulf. 60 nations participating in an effort we'll talk about a bit today. In Iraq, we helped to guide and implement a transition of a government with choices made by the Iraqis, their choices, their destiny, but we helped to create a framework within which they were transitioning from a Prime Minister Maliki to a Prime Minister Abadi and a new government that we could work with in order to be able to go out and fight against ISIL. In Afghanistan, we helped to shepherd a coalition government to emerge out of an extremely questionable election and close and negotiate a BSA and hopefully be in a position to transition Afghanistan. In the Iran negotiations, we are not complete. I don't know if we'll get there. But I know that trying is the essence of United States leadership, to find out whether or not there is a way with diplomacy to succeed in preventing a country from getting a nuclear weapon. And that we owe it to our citizens and the world to prove our willingness to try to do it peacefully before we have to make other choices if we did. On Ebola, there were predictions of 1 million people dying by Christmas time. At the moment that President Obama made the decision to deploy 4,000 American troops to go over there and help build the capacity to be able to try to prevent that from happening. There were huge questions at the time about how fast it might spread, how dangerous that might be, what might happen. But because of American leadership pulling together countries all over the world, you can now look at Liberia and Guinea and Sierra Leone and see huge reductions in the infection and see that, indeed, Americans are not waking up every day to the news of some new infection and some new challenge. On AIDS in Africa, we're on the cusp because of our additional efforts, which you've shared, you've helped lead, on the cusp of an AIDS-free generation of children. In Ukraine, we have held together, cobbled together, pieced together, cajoled, and managed to effect a series of sanctions that have, while not stopping everything altogether, nevertheless has given Ukraine an opportunity to survive as an independent and sovereign Ukraine, and has cost Russia a lot. Mr. Putin may be able to look at what's happening today in Donetsk or Luhansk or Debaltseve and say, wow, I'm doing a great job on short-term tactical stuff. But I'll tell you this, Russia is not doing a great right now. 50% reduction in the ruble's value, $151 billion of capital flight, predictions that Russia will be in recession this next year, extraordinary restraint on growth, and that has happened because of the coordinated sanctions that we've put in place. Now, there's more that I could run through. I'm not going to do it all now, but I'll just tell you, between TPP and TTIP, we are pursuing two of the most ambitious and important trade agreements in recent history. 40% of global GDP is wrapped up in the TPP. If we can achieve that, we will have a definition of the new standards of doing business in the region. And even China has said to us, if this works and it comes together, could we join it? We are far better ultimately seeing a China join an upgraded set of standards for doing business and rules of the economy and trade than to not do that and have others write those rules or have no rules at all. So I can run through, finally on climate, we can talk about climate, Mr. Chairman. I hope we will in the course of this. China, up until last year, was an opponent to doing anything about climate change. But because we reached out and worked with them starting literally a month and a half after I became secretary, President Obama was able to go over there, and China joined in a deal to announce its targets for the reduction of emissions and fossil fuel dependency, and a commitment of a goal to achieve alternative, renewable, and efficient energy. It's a huge impact. And because of that, in Lima, Peru, other countries came together and joined in to say we have to make Paris negotiations a success this year. So I would say to you that whether it's in the Arctic, on the Arctic Council, which we will assume the chairmanship of in about a month and a half, or whether it is on any of these things I've listed, and there are many things I haven't listed, cybersecurity, health structure, around the planet, the United States of America is proving that when we lead, we can make a difference, and the world needs that leadership. And I hope that in this budget, we can reflect the fact ultimately that the 1% we put into these endeavors, which result in so much benefit in the long term, so much security to Americans, will not be nickeled and dimed at a critical moment where we need to bolster yet more those things that we're able to do, like BBG, broadcasting, the counter messaging of ISIL, the counterterrorism initiatives we need to employ, the deprivation of the pool of recruits for ISIL. These are intensive efforts, and they will require a financial commitment, and we need to understand the connection. Mr. Chairman, I think you said something about the importance here of taking the budget role seriously. I know you do, but we need to connect the dots for everybody in America of the money spent out of this committee and the United States Congress on the security of our nation that comes to us through the work of diplomacy and the work of development on a daily basis. And frankly, we've been hurting ourselves in the past years where there's been a reduction from the population growth rate and the need and demand for that kind of investment. Madam Chair, thank you.
With the question, the administration wants countries in the Middle East to step up and play a greater role in the fight against ISIL, as we do. But as Jordan and Egypt and the Kurds are taking on a significant role and often successful, they're not getting the assistance they need. The White House claims that there are robust security relationships with these countries, but I would argue the U.S. is risking our long-term strategic allies. The Kurds, Jordanians, they're very frustrated with the amount of time it takes to get military aid to them. I know you do know that because they've argued that with you, and they've certainly called me. And the President's policy on Egypt continues to hold equipment such as the F-16s that are paid for and are clearly needed in the fight against ISIL and other terrorists in the regions are being withheld. I want you to ask you, why is the administration continuing to withhold equipment for Egypt that would help them combat ISIL and other threats?
Well, we're pushing very hard. In fact, that's a decision that I think is on the President's desk any time now. We are tied, as you know, by Congress to a certification process that I have to exercise, and I can certify or I can waive and make a decision what to move. But we have broken certain things out. One of the things we were waiting for, frankly, Madam Chair, was the announcement of the parliamentary elections. Now, we finally got that announcement. There were a number of people imprisoned. There's been some harassment of embassy employees. There have been some other, as you saw, Abdul al-Fattah was just sentenced to 5 years for taking part in a protest. You know, these are things that matter to us, obviously. The Al Jazeera journalists who are imprisoned, the NGOs who are required to be listed. So we've been talking as reasonably and as frequently as possible with our friends in Egypt. I have a very good working relationship with the Foreign Minister, Sameh Shoukry. I've had several meetings with President al-Sisi. I'm very grateful to President al-Sisi for his significant cooperation with respect to a number of security issues, and we want to get them these additional items. And I suspect, Madam Chair, that the decisions will be made shortly to try to come to closure on the sort of final choices of how we move on that. So Egypt has presented one set of challenges. One thing I want to make clear I believe Egypt is helping enormously with respect to counterterrorism. Egypt is doing a huge amount in Sinai. Egypt has been helpful with respect to Gaza, and Egypt has been essential with respect to some elements of the peace process, Israel and Palestine. Israel and Egypt is cooperating very significantly with Israel, and there's great intelligence cooperation and so forth. So by and large, I believe it is important for us to provide some of these items, and I believe decisions will be forthcoming that will set out how we may, in fact, proceed forward to do that. On Jordan, I think you know this. We've had many conversations about it, Madam. I'm frustrated as you are frustrated, and they've been a little frustrated, and I understand that. Before I received your letter, I met several weeks ago with Foreign Minister Nasser Judah, whom you all know well, and we signed a memorandum in which we agreed to put $1 billion a year for the next 3 years into the relationship with Jordan. This is before we received a letter from you. In addition, before I had received a letter from you, I had already initiated a review based on my conversations with Foreign Minister Judah to find out exactly what item was on request, exactly where it was in the chain of delivery, and why it might have been delayed. And I have already, I think just about the time I got your letter, I received the answer to all of those questions. And I now have a breakdown of all of those items, Tier 1 priorities, Tier 2, Tier 3. And so the Tier 1 items are now mostly on the way or in possession. F-16 spare parts, for instance, pilot survival, night vision, et cetera, are happening. The U-860 Blackhawks, we're trying to figure out, we will shortly notify you with respect to some formal procedures on that. So I could run through the long list with you. I think it's better probably to do that in a classified form. But I can just tell you that we are on top of this and moving, and these items need to get there as rapidly as possible.
We talked about this last year at the hearing, and I remember last year you were talking about the need of reforms and arrests of journalists and progress on setting the parliamentary elections. And those things have been done, literally. Some.
I think
not all. But
2 people were released, but for every person that gets released, regrettably, there have also been announcements of life imprisonments for one thing or another. Look, we're beginning to understand much better the restraints that President el-Sisi operates under, and there are some. And I think we're beginning to understand also some of the difficulties of independent judiciary and independent efforts that reflect on how the process is working there. What's important is Egypt is committed as a major partner in counterterrorism, and Egypt is critical. Its viability is critical to long-term stability of the region. I think the United States needs to reflect that, and the President does in our policy, and I think we're seeing that happen in what is unfolding now.
you may see it happening, I certainly don't. And you know, we've had numerous conversations. The staff has asked questions about this. The situation with the Kurds has gone on for months and months and months. And every time it's, we're making some progress, we're doing this. The Egyptians came back to me and said, we don't know what you want. We have no idea, because we've urged them to play a part, and they certainly are. The King of Jordan, for goodness sakes, has put on his uniform and is flying the planes. So I think that the slowness, the processes simply are very, very disturbing, and I would like from you a weekly status, an immediate, on this very immediate. It gets worse and worse, and everyone that we hear talk, the generals that come and say, we can stop it now, or at some point we can't stop it.
Well, Madam Chair, let me just say to you respectfully on this issue of the Kurds, because I've heard this for a while, and I think it is a little out of proportion, if I can say so. We've provided more than 34 million rounds of light and heavy ammunition to the Kurds. 15,000 hand grenades, 45,000 mortars, 50,000 RPG cartridges, and 18,000 rifles. Thousands more rounds of ammunition and weapons have been identified for donation and being prepared for delivery now. This is in addition to more than 300 tons of arms and ammunition that the government of Iraq provided and delivered directly to the Kurds. We've also provided 25 MRAPs to our Kurdish partners. Hundreds of airstrikes have hit ISIL elements in Mosul, in the Sinjar Mountain, and other areas of northern Iraq, which has provided relief to the Kurdish forces. We have established a joint operations center in Erbil that has facilitated unprecedented cooperation with the KRG. We worked to get, I personally was on the telephone, with President Barzani and others, to work to create a corridor which helped the Kurds to be able to get into Kobani and help provide relief there and ultimately help win the victory of Kobani. We've provided $208 million in humanitarian support to deal with displaced Kurds. That's an estimated 850,000 people in the Kurdish Khuzestan area. We've provided 110 tons of humanitarian supplies to them. We've provided extensive diplomatic engagement with...
I'm going to stop you.
Yeah, but
I know
just-
what you're going to say, and I know what you are saying. You know my position. I think you know the position of members of the Congress, and so we'll continue this as we go on, but I certainly want to have other people have the opportunity to ask questions. Mrs. Lowy.
Thank you very much. As you know, many of us have had many briefings on Iran, many of which are in a classified setting. So obviously the questions that I'm going to ask do not include some items that have been discussed in a classified setting. But we know that the United States is at a crossroads with Iran. The overall package must ensure we have closed all pathways to a bomb. You have said repeatedly that no deal is better than a bad deal. I just want to make a couple of points, and then if you can respond. Can you assure us that a good deal includes the following: dismantling its centrifuge infrastructure, dismantling its heavy water facility in Iraq and close all covert options, contains strict verification...
What was the second? I'm sorry, what was the second?
The second one, dismantling its heavy water facility at Iraq and closing all covert options, containing strict verification and fully detail the possible military dimensions of its programs, allow full and unfettered access to any facility, including Parchin, Fordo, Natanz, and other facilities, military or otherwise, have phased-in sanctions relief to ensure compliance, and last no less than 15 years in duration. It has been reported that the Supreme Leader has said, and I quote, "I would go along with any agreement that could be made, of course, if it is not a bad deal." This is, of course, the same Supreme Leader who repeatedly refers to Israel as the, quote, barbaric Jewish state that, quote, has no cure but to be annihilated. Many experts with whom I've spoken don't think that Khomeini is really capable of making a deal. But I know how hard and how focused you are in trying to make a good deal. And again, you've said that no deal is better than a bad deal. Do you really see any evidence that the regime is seriously interested in giving up its nuclear program and working with the international community? You've indicated this is the last phase of negotiations and that the administration would not support another extension. You've just returned from Geneva. Is this still your assessment? You've already stated that a good deal provides us at least 1 year to respond should Iran renege on the deal and break out. I still don't understand how we arrived at 1 year, and why is 1 year enough insurance for us, for Israel, for the region? I know how hard you've been working on this issue. I, again, respect your commitment, your thoughtfulness, but if you could answer these questions, I'd be most appreciative.
Try to answer as many as I can, as fast as I can, Congresswoman Lowy. Let me go to the end. It's probably a good place to begin, which is this question of breakout in 1 year, and do we know it's enough, and why do we know it's enough, and so forth. Let me make clear what breakout is in the context that we are talking about. And I want to make clear also, when we talk about 1 year, we're talking about 1 year for a period of time that we believe sufficient to build confidence about our access and about the workings of the program, and to understand that there isn't a covert track. But breakout in the way that many of us thought of it when I was here in the Senate in the 80s, late 80s and 90s, we were debating still the Soviet Union in the 80s with Ronald Reagan and certain missile systems and so forth. Breakout meant your ability to go with nuclear weapons. You broke out and, man, you had a nuclear weapon right away and you could go do something. That's not what we're talking about here. What we're talking about here is breakout, as we apply it to the 1 year we're looking for this period of time, is the time it takes from when they decide from their constrained and restricted and verified level of enrichment. If they were to kick everybody out and say, we're going at it now, and it's just obvious they're going at it, that would be a breach the moment they did it. You don't need 6 months. The minute they kick you out, you know they're in breach. So if you have a year, you have a lot of leeway. But that's a time frame from when they make the decision to not comply to try to get a rush to enough fissile material for one potential weapon. Remember, enough fissile material for one potential weapon, 1 year. That's not having a weapon. That could be years away from having a deliverable weapon or a tested weapon or a weapon that you have to be concerned about. So if you have a year from the time in which one of your inspectors discovers they're not complying, or a year from the time that one of your intrusive cameras or visits or visible inspections of the mining or their uranium or their production or their centrifuges shows you something's up, you can slap sanctions right back on and worse. Or, of course, you always have all the options we have that exist today. We're not giving up one option. So when you say to me, do I know that 1 year is sufficient insurance with respect to the ability to break it, you better believe it. And you know what? You know what we have today? You know what Israel has today? 2 to 3 months. And the reason it may be 3 or 4 months right now is because of what we put in place with the interim agreement. Now remember, Prime Minister Netanyahu thought the interim agreement, quote, deal of a century for Iran. He thought it was the worst thing that ever happened. And some people in the Congress echoed that when I came up here to talk about the interim agreement. Well, guess what? Every aspect of the interim agreement has been complied with. The then 20% enriched uranium that threatened Israel is now gone, reduced to zero. The Fordow, that then we didn't know what was going on in it, that threatened Israel, is now inspected on a daily basis. Iraq, that then threatened it as a potential producer of plutonium and a track for weapons production, has been stopped dead in its tracks, and they have not been able to further any commissioning of Iraq. That makes Israel safer. No one, I mean, it defies imagination to make the argument that if Israel was threatened with a 2-month breakout period and they're now at more months and we're trying to get a year, that they're not safer. Now that's just the beginning of the many pieces of this agreement. And I'm not going to go into all of the agreement right now because we don't have an agreement. We may not get an agreement. They may not be willing to do some of the things that you listed that you think are the ingredients of a good agreement. And I'm not going to sit here, in fairness, Madam Ranking Member, and go through each of those items because I'm not going to negotiate here. I want to negotiate with them and see where we are. But of course we have to have a resolution of Parchin and a resolution of Iraq so it can't produce plutonium on a bomb path. And a resolution of Fordow so it's not a secret hidden enrichment facility and so forth. And those are the things that we're arguing about right now. Now, the point I would make to everybody is In the year 2003, under the Bush administration, they had a policy of no enrichment. It was American policy. There were 164 centrifuges then spinning. 2003, 2004, 2005, 2006, 2007, 2008, all during the Bush administration. Nothing stopped what happened. They kept building. Now they're at 19,000 that could function. There are not that many functioning. And so obviously we pursued a policy for a period of time under a very tough administration that didn't hesitate to use its muscles when it wanted to. Didn't use its muscles on that. And the fact is, we wind up where we are today. Iran knows how to make fuel. They know how to do this. So we've got to decide, how do we get the best shot at being able to constrain from the production of a nuclear weapon over the course of the future years? Now, that's what we're trying to do, and we're trying to close off each pathway to the bomb, through Natanz, through Fordow, through Iraq, and covert. And the test of that will be in the days ahead.
I just want to thank you very much, and obviously we could have a longer discussion, but I guess we have votes right now.
Well, we're going to have a longer discussion. I have no doubt about that if we get an agreement. If we don't, we'll have a longer discussion about the things we're going to need to do as a result.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Mr. Secretary, let me talk about Iran. A New York Times article last Thursday cited a recent report by the International Atomic Energy Agency that Iran was still refusing to answer long-standing questions about suspected work on weapons designs theretofore. As you say, there's a very short time remaining for conclusion for that framework agreement. And their continued refusal to provide IAEA with answers about past nuclear weapons work, that's troubling. Because if they refuse to answer, how can we be sure that whatever is agreed upon, they will live by and abide by?
Well, there are a bunch of questions the IAEA has asked that are going to have to be answered. And we've made that very clear. The IAEA is going to have to get answers to questions. What is more critical than answering, than having some confession of, oh yeah, we were doing this back then, is getting the ability to know what they're doing now with clarity and going forward, so that you can prevent any development whatsoever. We presume, I mean, we all have pretty good information. We're in a non-classified venue here, but I think I can safely say that we've made our presumptions based on the information we have about what they were doing. So, we're certainly proceeding with eyes open that it's our belief they had a weapons track, and we understand that we need to respond accordingly in whatever it is that we do here.
Well, I mean, how can we trust Iran given the lack of compliance with past agreements with IAEA? And your own Deputy Secretary, Tony Blinken, has testified before the Senate that during the joint plan of action, there were situations that, quote, we believe there were violations of the JPOA, end quote. How can we trust them, given this?
Well, there have been no violations of the JPOA. I'm not sure what he's referring to. There may have been a place or two we had a question, but they were answered. We raised one issue. There was one centrifuge which was being fed at one point in time, which we learned of, and we learned of it because of the verification that we had, which, by the way, is far less comprehensive than the verification we want to get ultimately. But we did learn of it, which is an indication that there was transparency and that we had accountability. And the moment we mentioned it, it was really based on a misunderstanding of what was current. Under the JPOA, under the interim agreement, they are allowed to pursue the current level of what they're at. This, we argued, was new, and we won the argument, and they stopped, and that was the end of it. But look, a fundamental basis of your question, Mr. Chairman, you said, how can we trust them? This agreement is not based on trust. No arms control agreement is based on trust. Remember Ronald Reagan's famous trust but verify. That's a euphemism for make sure you're able to know what's happening. And that is the guideline of this negotiation. It's not based on trust. You may be able to build some trust. The last year of compliance has frankly helped people to have a sense of seriousness of purpose here and intent. The fact that they did destroy their 20% uranium stockpile, the fact that they have provided access, the fact that they did stop work on Iraq. I mean, all of these things begin to build a little bit of confidence that this is serious. But we have to build a structure here that gives us great confidence going out into the future that we will know what they're doing, so it isn't relying on anybody's word or on any level of trust.
A lot depends on what happens, obviously. So we wish you the best. How you?
A lot does depend on it. I agree with you.
Short question.
Yeah, let me try to make it as short as I
Thank you.
can. I'm getting back to what Chairwoman Granger was talking about and the issue of Egypt and Jordan and our relationship with them. We know Egypt, as an example, 82 million people. We know what their human rights concerns. We also know the United States of America has the best country in the world and democracy that works, and we want to make sure that we deal with those issues of human rights in the countries that we're dealing with that are allies. But Egypt is very critical to the Middle East. They're critical to Israel. They're critical to a lot of our goals and agendas. I just want to ask this question. We want to export our democracy, but we're going into countries that have thousands of years of traditions and issues such as that. And yet it seems that if they aren't exactly following our model, that we're slow to be involved. So my question would be, should we want to support democratic issues in these countries, but what lessons have we learned based on what's happened in Egypt, especially by our democracy efforts, when in fact you had the Muslim Brotherhood taking control, the country was almost falling apart. Then we had what some people were calling a coup, and yet Egypt was trying to take control of their country and their all the issues that they were dealing with as far as unrest and terrorism and those type of things. Should we act more quickly with those countries based on their traditions, trying to influence our traditions, but they're our allies, and hold back of giving them what they need to do to take on an ISIS situation, a terrorism situation?
Well, I personally don't believe so, Congressman. I think that we have to be very, very careful and very thoughtful about each country's ability to transition and measure our expectations in a very thoughtful way. We should not be automatic and sort of simplistic about that endeavor. We certainly shouldn't stereotype and fit everybody into the same box because every place is different. And the lessons certainly that I've learned in the last 10 or 15 years are that, we really need to think very, very carefully about what kind of political space, what capacity there is for the embrace of our vision and at what pace. We sometimes come crashing in with a sense that, we can sort of hold out X amount of aid and say, you got to do this and this in order to do it. And they kind of look at us nowadays increasingly in many countries and scratch their heads and ask a lot more questions than they used to, and are not quite as impressed by the level of our leverage because, frankly, it's significantly diminished, if you want to know the truth. The Emiratis and Saudis are putting $20 million a year into Egypt. And we're putting $1.3 billion or whatever it is, $1.6 billion. And so they look at it and they say, well, do we have to put up with all this headache since we've got these other folks we could turn to and we'll get some help there? President Putin just paid a very visible well-received visit to Egypt. And there was an exchange and agreement for some very significant purchase of weapons and so forth. They'd prefer to, buy them and have the relationship with America. But they feel like we're sometimes asking more than the market will bear at the rate at which we're looking to them to
And we need to
transition.
evaluate that policy. And
We
Sisi
have to
said
look
a
at it
very
carefully.
positive thing, which I think is important in the Muslim world. He stood up to his, mullahs, and said, that you have got to stop this type of radical issue as far as jihad. And that is a good message that we hope the Islamic community will send to these small 1% of terrorists that are trying to take the world over.
Well, I encouraged them strongly with respect to a number of people they needed to release. They released some. I encouraged them to rapidly move to set the date for the election. They set the date publicly for the election. We encouraged them to do a number of other things. I won't go into all of them here. But to the best of our awareness, they worked hard to try to do those things. They got some done and couldn't get others done, but we know they made a bona fide effort on some of them and ran into various roadblocks. I'll see you in a little bit. Maybe, let me just
talk on. I'll explain to you what happened later.
Okay, that was so odd. I reached for it and went,
I figured it out. The other subcommittees have the staff sent in between.
oh, okay. The hearing will now come to order. I'll now turn to Mr. Dent for his questions.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good afternoon, Mr. Secretary. Good to be with you. First, I wanted to commend you for your good effort in Afghanistan with respect to the presidential election where you helped mediate the aftermath and successfully, I might add. And so I wanted to thank you for your leadership there. And I agree with what you just said moments ago on TPP and TTIP about how essential those agreements are to setting standards and advancing our interests globally. On the issue of Ukraine, however, I wanted to raise a real concern that I have. This very recent ceasefire agreement negotiated facilitated by the Germans and the French seemed very desperate and feckless. To be quite honest, I believe the West has been humiliated. As much as I admire the Germans and the French, they have taken the idea of arming the Ukrainian government off the table. Putin knows that. These ceasefires will last as long as Vladimir Putin wants them to last. And that has been the case. It seems that we, the U.S., have outsourced the negotiations to our friends, and the results have not been very good. And I'm deeply concerned about that. I think there needs to be greater leadership. The West has been humiliated, and at some point, I believe we're going to have to provide some kind of lethal defensive weapons to the Ukrainian government, anti-tank weapons, anti-artillery. And I'd like to hear your perspective on that, because I just feel that this recent ceasefire has been really a major setback for all of us. And I do appreciate your leadership on the sanctions regime, and I know our European friends always haven't been as accommodating. So appreciate hearing your comments.
Thank you, Congressman. I appreciate that very, very much. In fairness, I think that Chancellor Merkel has actually been leading very forcefully in this and working very, very hard to make sanctions happen at times where others in Europe were not quite as prepared to hold the line, take the measures. So I think that Germany's leadership, France's engagement with Germany and leadership has been important. I think it was important for them to try to see whether or not they could make Minsk meaningful. And they themselves took the position that if Putin didn't adhere to it and was not prepared to take the steps of the Minsk, that then there's Plan B. So Plan B is really tougher sanctions and additional support to Ukraine. And I think I would not count everybody out in terms of whether or not, as a result of what has happened, they're automatically against the provision of some defensive assistance to Ukrainians. But there's not yet a clarity to the breach, the total breach with respect to the Minsk effort. Prisoners were exchanged the other day. Some weapons have pulled back. Some battalions are now assembled on the border, not inside. So it's a little unclear. And I think they and we are waiting to see how this unfolds in the next days and hours. I talked at lunchtime yesterday with the Foreign Minister of Germany, who had just come out of the meeting with the French, the Ukrainians, and the Russians. And it was his sense that they had sort of mapped out a few potential steps over the next few days. So we're getting to that critical decision time, Congressman. The President has a number of options that he is asking his team to evaluate, and he'll make the appropriate decision together with discussions with Chancellor Merkel. In fact, he may well have talked to Chancellor Merkel today or yesterday.
Can I also just quickly add, speaking of Germany, we have a Congress Bundestag youth exchange program. I'm very involved with the German-American Caucus and study group on Germany, and we have serious concerns about the State Department's decision to reduce by half the funding for the Congress Bundestag youth exchange program. This program is essential to maintaining a strong relationship between our two countries. Chancellor Merkel, I know, raised the issue of this cut when she visited the U.S. Can you give us the rationale why the State Department has gone against clear, I thought, congressional intent, and unilaterally moved funding away from the Bundestag exchange program?
Well, it's still going to remain the largest exchange program between the United States and any country in the world. The academic year last year had about 710 total participants, 350 Americans, 360 Germans, and the funding has been a pretty level $4 million. The reduction in our judgment will allow us to meet some other high priority demands for exchanges that we're having to support. One is like Ukraine, for instance. We're trying to get Ukrainians part of it. We're trying to bolster our networks in the entire periphery around that region. So whether it's Georgia, Moldova, or the Baltics, other countries, we want them to be able to participate. So it's not it's really trying to allocate according to priority and available resources. Now, if you want to help us and plus it up a little bit, there's nothing we'd like more than to keep it at the same level. But this is where I'm talking about robbing Peter to pay Paul. All those are virtuous and important efforts, and I think you can see that. If you can get some students out of each of those other places and it makes a difference in the long-term capacity building of those countries and their outlooks, that's spreading the wealth a little more. And as I say, the German program will still remain the largest program we have.
Thank you. Yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Serrano. I'm sorry, I'm wrong. Ms. Wasserman Schultz, I apologize.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Secretary, it's good to see you, and I want to shift gears a little bit. I know that the line of questioning is focused mostly on the Middle East and Iran, but the subcommittee obviously has other focal points, including food aid and disaster relief. And so I wanted to just touch on where we are in our progress with reform, because in recent years we've seen increased momentum to push for reform of our international food aid programs and make them more effective and more efficient and save more lives in less time. And so while obviously the focal point there is on being more fiscally responsible, hopefully our goal is also to make sure that we can end hunger and provide nutrition to more people. And at the same time, obviously, that helps with our own local farmers and agriculture and production. The President's budget request included several reform measures that allow for increased flexibility within those programs and increased funding for local and regional purchase of food aid. And that has bipartisan support. But my question is, do you believe that the reforms that have been proposed, the increased flexibility for the type of and delivery of aid, are those essential for responding to the crises that we're facing today, the ones that we might encounter in the future, and really enable us to effectively respond to food insecurity, but at the same time moving towards resilience and self-reliance?
We hope so, Congresswoman. That was the purpose of these reforms, as you know. The effort is to try to be able to deliver more faster with greater local buy-in. It increases our reach and it increases the cost savings. Now, the proof will be in what happens. Right now it can take from 4 to 6 months to buy and deliver U.S. products. And we know there was a certain upheaval here about this, but if you allow more cash-based activities and then USAID's food programs can become much faster, much more nimble, much more responsive, and it actually helps to build some capacity and infrastructure in the communities you're trying to create a sustainable cycle for. So we think it's the right direction to move in, and it allows us to reach 2 million more beneficiaries, about 25% increase.
And just briefly, because I don't have a lot of time left and I'm the ranking member on the Ledge Branch Committee and have to go back to that hearing, what steps is the administration taking to ensure that the Helms Amendment is correctly applied and that U.S. foreign assistance that may be used for abortions in the case of rape, incest, and life endangerment, and to make sure that we can prevent pregnancy is our primary goal?
Well, we evaluated in every single country and every program where we are. I'm not sure, I'm not aware that there has been a specific complaint that something is lacking or missing in that effort. Is there something specific that you're?
There has been, not on the part of the administration, but an issue surrounding the misinterpretation of the Helms Amendment that prohibits the use of funds for the performance of abortion as a method of family planning, but it's been incorrectly implemented, essentially to become a total ban on funding for abortion. And so that's I hate to use the term nuance, but there's a difference between prohibiting abortion entirely and prohibiting its use as a method of family planning. And so that interpretation or misinterpretation I'm concerned about, and I'm wondering if that has been addressed.
Well, let me do this. I haven't had that specific conversation, frankly. Let me investigate that, and of course, I have
By the way, Mr. Secretary, it predates this administration, so.
I'm not taking it personally, actually. I remember this debate, when I was up here. I just want to find out exactly, because I haven't been part of any conversation that has examined some shortfall in it, so let me find out where
Thank
we
you.
are. We'll
Thank you.
examine that.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Madam Chair, you're back.
Well, thank you, and thanks for coming. I knew you were chairing something. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Mr. Diaz-Balart.
Yeah, thank you very much, Madam Chairwoman. Mr. Secretary, let me bring it a little bit closer to home to this hemisphere. Cuba. As you know, the U.S. law states that if certain conditions are met by the Castro regime, that the embargo, in essence, goes away. The President has been stating, he said it in the State of the Union, that he wants the embargo to go away. And he wants Congress to lift the embargo without fulfilling those conditions that are in the law. So which of those conditions does this administration oppose? Or which of those conditions does this administration believe that the Cuban people do not deserve? Because let me tell you what they are. They are the release of all political prisoners. They are the legalization of political parties, independent press and independent labor unions, and free elections. Those are the conditions in law. The administration has said that we don't need to meet those conditions, that Congress should get rid of the sanctions without those conditions. Which one of those conditions does this administration think are too much to ask, or unfair, or the Cuban people do not deserve?
None. They deserve them. There's none that's unfair. We should ask for all of them. What this administration believes, however, is that the embargo has not produced them and will not produce them. In fact, it's the exact opposite. We believe that if you lift the embargo and engage more thoroughly with Cuba, you have a much higher rate of probability and a much faster set of transformations that can take place. I believe that very strongly, personally. I believed it when I was here in the Senate. I think we've actually helped repression by shutting it down. It's much easier for regimes that are not held accountable, that don't interact with the world, that sort of are shut off, to be repressive than places that have been opened up where there's engagement and countries are involved.
Let's talk about that, if I may, Mr. Secretary. And as you know, I apologize for interrupting, but we don't have a lot of time.
Go ahead.
So as of the time of the President's December 17th announcement, there have been hundreds of political arrests, including more than just this weekend, 200 last weekend, which including the arrest of over 80 ladies in white, more than 90 from the Cuban Patriotic Union, including very well-known activists. By the way, at least 5 of the President's so-called 53 political prisoners that the President said was one of the things that he got out of this deal for the United States and for Cuba, have been rearrested since then. And yet, it seems that the administration is continuing to negotiate even though the regime has not only continued their repression, has been escalating their repression, but even those that the president said were kind of the success story that the Castro regime released, a number of them have been rearrested. So again, it would seem that the administration is looking forward to normalization at all costs, regardless of what the regime is doing. And is there anything that would cause that the Castro regime could do to stop this administration from normalizing, which, as you know, normalizing the United States for a terrorist regime, that's a pretty good gift. So what could they do? What should they do? What can they do that would stop the president and this administration from normalizing?
Well, first of all, we don't know that they are currently engaging in international terrorism. That evaluation is being made. Well,
Secretary, there was a shipment of arms that went to North Korea that even the UN stated. I'm sure you're aware of that, Mr. Secretary.
I am aware of that, but the standard by which you all wrote the law with respect to what has to be measured for international terrorism is whether or not they've engaged in acts of international terrorism in the last 6 months.
You are aware of the arms by the Colombian military confiscated arms recently that were in the hands of the FARC?
Well, this is all being evaluated right now.
But you are aware of that?
I don't
And that would
know-
qualify as
I don't know
an
who-
act of terrorism.
I don't know yet. I'm not going to pre-qualify what is being appropriately judged with the input of all of our intel community. All the relevant agencies are asked to contribute to this. You will be well, obviously, advised and briefed with respect to what the conclusions are on it. And I don't know what they are yet because they're engaged in that endeavor. That's a prerequisite, obviously, for the ability to move forward. But that said, let me just say to you that we're well aware of the ladies in white and the challenges internally. Actually, I interpret that as sort of reaction to it's a manifestation of the fear, but it might come. But I think there's a much greater opportunity to be able to hold them accountable and deal with that when you have the scrutiny that will come with additional transactions, commerce, presence, money in hands of people there, people traveling, open up standards that come with this. And there's a much greater ability. I mean, that's how we've operated in many other countries. We had, Richard Nixon opened up and normalized our relations with China. We still have huge disagreements with China. We've normalized, opened up our relations with the Soviet Union. We had huge years during the Cold War where we were fighting them in a Cold War. But we were able to do more as a consequence of that engagement. And ultimately, both changed. One disappeared, the Soviet Union, and the other has been increasingly partnering, opening up, engaging in different ways, even as we continue to have some problems. So these things don't change overnight, and I don't expect that will, nor do you. The question is, are you better positioned to be able to fight for the things that matter to you? Can you leverage people's rights? Can you send an ambassador in to raise the profile on a particular human rights challenge? Can you do more to be able to do that? We have not backed off of one of those priorities. And in fact, when Roberta Jacobson, Assistant Secretary Jacobson, was there, she met with civil society. They didn't like it, but she met with them. And so we will continue to press our case, but we also think we are far more advantaged in doing so if we are having diplomatic relations and engaging and opening up so that a lot of folks from Florida, from New Jersey, from other places who have family there would be free to visit, bring ideas, bring their openness, bring their money and other things, which will change life in Cuba. I have no doubt about it.
And, Mr. Secretary, my time has clearly expired. I would not use China as a model to talk about when we're talking about human rights. That's precisely what we do not. Well, you talk about the success of China. I would tell you that's not a success.
Please don't put words in my mouth.
You mentioned China. I did not, sir.
I did. I mentioned China as a country with whom we have normalized diplomatic relations and huge differences, is what I said. Huge differences, both on a political system, on human rights, on business practices. cyber, run the list.
Yeah, and has that helped the
But
human
we
rights condition
have
of the Chinese
diplomatic
people?
relations.
Has that helped the human rights condition of the Chinese people? That's a discussion for another time because my time is up. I would argue, Mr. Secretary, that it has not. Thank you. I
Serrano.
yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary, for your service. Though the origins of Serrano and Diaz-Balart come from two different islands in the Caribbean, whenever we follow each other, we usually stay on the same island for discussion. So on the issue of Cuba, let me congratulate the administration for seeing the light that this country hasn't seen for over 50 years and understanding that we do better when we invade people with blue jeans and sneakers and ideas and trade, that when we try to isolate them. And I think that you're right. We helped whatever went wrong in Cuba throughout these years by isolating them. I hope to see that change come true. So I have two questions for you. Put them together. Without telling me what I'm not supposed to know, I can't believe I'm saying this on TV. We're supposed to know everything, right, Mr. Congress? But without telling me what I'm supposed to know, how are those negotiations going with Cuba, and what is it that we want the Cubans to give us in return for opening up diplomatic relations? And secondly, my opinion, and this is totally my opinion, we know that our differences with Venezuela stemmed, one, from the style of President Chavez, but it also came strongly from their relationship to Cuba. So if we get closer to Cuba, does it open the door to get closer to Venezuela?
Let me answer both of those. First of all, the negotiations regarding with Cuba right now are really fairly straightforward regarding diplomatic relations. It's a process of diplomacy and automatic process regarding normalization. The parameters of that were negotiated originally, which involved the release of the prisoners. There's obviously a concern about anybody who may have been arrested, or even the ladies in white. That issue will be raised for certain. In addition, the Internet agreement and other components of what was already agreed on will be on the table. But the most important part of this now is really the pro forma stuff of diplomatic relations. Visas, travel, the access and process by which your diplomat's going to be treated. That's sort of the hard stuff of diplomatic relations, and that's what's being talked about right now. With respect to Venezuela and Cuba, I will tell you that I talked to President, I actually shouldn't, but the president of a Latin American country to tell him that we were engaging in this policy. And there was almost a whoop of excitement on the other side of the phone saying, wow, that can really help change things throughout Latin America. If America can begin to have a different relationship with Cuba, it will change what has been a tool, a weapon that has been used against us by other countries in Latin America. And so, in fact, this president thought that he was going to undertake to call President Maduro immediately and talk to him and say, hey, don't get left behind. Look what's happening. Be part of the future. Now, that hasn't happened yet, and we have serious concerns about what is going on in Venezuela, and obviously we're sort of perplexed by the and frustrated by the frequency with which President Maduro seems to want to blame everything on us when we have in fact done nothing. And every time he's in political trouble, he tries to play the anti-American card and, starts citing some mythical coup or something that isn't taking place. It would be great if he could realize the benefits to the people of Venezuela. The people of Venezuela are currently being hurt by the policies that he is pursuing, and we hope that he will realize that we are ready to engage in normal relationship of nations and become engaged in helping to deal with the problems of his people, the poverty, the opportunity, the education is needed, other things, if he wants to engage in a legitimate relationship. But there's no doubt that this was well received throughout Latin America, quite surprised by many countries, very welcome by all.
Yes, it was, and I can tell
Except
you,
perhaps Venezuela, that may be highly unsettled by it because it sort of leaves them quite isolated.
but isolated, yes, but still unable to blame our country for its treatment of Cuba, which has been used by many Latin American countries throughout the years. So that's why you saw this whooping, this excitement. And I think your statement that the countries in Latin America would sign up, a lot of Americans just don't understand that Cuba became a symbol to them, of American oppression. And so when that gets settled, then Latin America has to look at itself again. And we have to look at the fact, and I'll close with this, that Latin America in our generation, Mr. Secretary, went from dictators to elected people who didn't care about their constituents, to leftist people who built schools and got elected, and built hospitals and got elected. And so if we understand that and we embrace that, regardless of how left they are of us, we may accomplish more than what we're accomplishing in Cuba. And I just want to congratulate you, because I've spent 25 years in Congress saying it's a wasted philosophy and policy. It has served nothing. And to see this president take this bold step is historic, and I appreciate it, and I thank you.
Thank you, Congressman.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
The Secretary has to leave here at 4:45. That's 15 minutes, and we have two that have not asked questions. Mr. Fortenberry.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Secretary, welcome. I want to share with you a story and return to the Middle East. In 1979, when I was a young college student, I lived for a time in Egypt, and it was the year of the peace accords between Israel and Egypt, and there was a celebratory atmosphere of this newfound relationship with America. But I lived for a time in a remote oasis area with farmers in the western desert. And one of the farmers, their English was very limited, so you did the best you could, but one of the farmers wanted to show me something. And he took me to one of his neighbors, and he grabbed his neighbor's hand, and he took his wrist, and he bowed and placed his neighbor's wrist right on his face. His neighbor was a Coptic Christian, and he was a Muslim. And his neighbor had the tattoo of Christianity, which is common among Copts, on his wrist. He was trying to tell me a couple of things. One, that they were brothers, that they were friends, and also that I was welcome there in that village. This story is very hard to reconcile with what is happening today, particularly with the emergence of ISIL and this 8th century barbarism with 21st century weapons that is not only assaulting life, but it's assaulting this sacred space of human dignity, this right, this value of being able to hold reasonably held beliefs and exercise them in religious tradition. So once ISIL is hopefully contained, degraded, and eliminated, we still live with the difficult problem of assuring a religious pluralism, and that the ancient peoples who have been there, who have every much as right to be there as anyone else, Christians, Yazidis, other religious minorities, as well as innocent Muslim people, are being victimized by this. A new day should shine forth whereby this right of conscience and religious freedom should be respected. In this regard, in the State Department, I have a suggestion and a plea for you. You have an ambassador for international religious freedom, but I understand that his role is not as perhaps robust as it could be in reporting directly to you. This assault by ISIL is not only an assault on human dignity and life, it's an assault on civilization itself. So again, once it's contained, this ideal of bringing forth a new and robust understanding of protecting the rights and dignities of all persons, no matter their religious faith. Middle Eastern Christianity is shattered, and someone's going to have to pick up the pieces here. If we have time, I'd like to return to the question of how the Kurds can help in this regard, because they've been doing a very significant heavy lift in protecting that population as well as the Yazidis. But if you'd care to comment on the ambassador for religious freedom in the position that they have in the State Department?
Well, Rabbi Saperstein is as distinguished an advocate as there is, and he has access to me anytime. I mean, I have enormous respect for him. He knows that. I worked very hard to get him to be able to come in and take this job on. And the last thing he's going to suffer for is lack of access to me, I assure you. This is a huge priority within the State Department. I also appointed the first faith-based liaison office with Sean Casey filling that role. We're deeply involved in trying to pull interfaith efforts together in order to appropriately stand up for religious freedom, but also to harness the full measure of force that comes from leaders within various religions to start speaking out about the true Islam, about interfaith abilities and needs and so forth. So I'm very excited about it. I think we could not have gotten, the position has existed under prior administrations, but I think everybody would agree that Rabbi Saperstein is hugely appropriate to this moment, and I expect nothing but good results.
Well, I agree. I hear you saying, I'm interpreting your words as that you have elevated and intensified the positioning of this ambassador within the dynamics of the department. And I think he, as well as whoever comes along, needs to have a seat at the table as the rebuilding begins in the Middle East, so that not only stability takes place, but the very basis for that stability of respect for human dignity and rights as expressed in religious freedom is right there next to everything else. Defense considerations, economic considerations, human dignity considerations.
Well, it's at the center of the struggle we're involved in,
Yes.
and we all need to pay attention to that.
Mr.
Thank you.
Stewart.
Madam Chairwoman, thank you, and Mr. Secretary, thank you, sir. Thank you for your many, many years of service. Thank you for your patience today as we've had votes and other responsibilities. And though you and I might see the world differently in some respects, and politically we may not agree on everything, I do respect the leadership that you are providing and the administration in that. In framing my question, I'd like to tell you that I spent 14 years as an Air Force pilot, as a military officer. During that time, I was the pilot rep for the implementation of START Treaty with the former Soviet Union. It was a great experience. I learned a lot. One of the things I learned from my military experience in general, from that experience with the START Treaty, and frankly from some of my experience here in Congress, is that for a treaty or an agreement to work, there has to be a modicum of trust between the two parties. They may be adversaries, they may not like each other, but both of them must want the treaty to be successful, and again, for there to be some element to trust. And to return to a topic that we've discussed here, but I'd like to pursue it in a slightly different way, I'm not sure that we have that trust with Iran. And let me explain what I mean by that. Iran is a state sponsor of terrorism. They've been recognized as such for more than 30 years. Hezbollah, Hamas, the list of them working against our interest is very long. And so I would ask, I think, to you, sir, two questions. I could go on for quite a long time telling you what you already know, that they have been, and I think view us as an enemy in many regards, perhaps in most regards. They have a long list of working against our interests. Can you give me a single example of where they have worked with us as a partner or with any of our allies in a constructive way? And the second question would be, how do we reconcile the damage that I believe this has done with our primary partner in the area, and that would be our friend of Israel, and their suspicions of these negotiations, and whether we protect their interest as well?
Well, first, let me begin, Congressman. I want to thank you for your service. I really appreciate, like everybody does, anybody who puts on the uniform and spends a few years.
I got to tell you, flying jets was a lot more fun than what I do now.
As a pilot, since I was in college, only out of currency since I've been Secretary of State, I agree with you. Let me just say to you that you raised two issues there. Is there any issue where they've worked with us? Well, they're working with us on this right now. They put the interim agreement in place. over a year ago now. It's about, I think it was around November, we cut the treaty, the deal, not a treaty. So it's been more than a year. They've done everything they said they would do in the context of that. They have also kept secret those things that we thought needed to be kept secret as we work through, what could be a final agreement. I mean, we operate under the rule, nothing is agreed until everything is agreed. And that means that whatever we may have agreed over here, we got to keep, because it may require one or the other to say yes to something that may not be very popular back home, but may be defensible. But it isn't defensible till you have the whole agreement. They have not burned us with respect to that, nor we them. And that has facilitated a kind of dialogue that's pretty direct and open, and allows us now to bear down on some of these things. They recognize we have difficulties, we recognize they have difficulties, and we all have bottom lines. That's in any negotiation. So the interim agreement is one example of trying to work together on something. Now, there are some things they've done that help us, but we're not coordinating with them. We're not working on it. We haven't asked them to do it. But for instance, fighting ISIL. They're totally opposed to ISIL. And they are, in fact, taking on and fighting and eliminating ISIL members along the Iraqi border near Iran, and have serious concerns about what that would do to the region and so forth. So we have at least a mutual interest, if not a cooperative effort. But in the end, I emphasize to you, your second question was how to reconcile the damage that they may have done or that they could do to Israel in this. That's making a presumption, if you don't mind my saying so, that we're not going to have a deal here that in our judgment will absolutely protect Israel. It's not just Israel, by the way. It's us. It's every country in the region. And it's not just us at the table trying to do this. People need to focus on this. Russia is as adamant as we are that Iran cannot engage in proliferation activities. China is at the table. China has been helpful in this process, as has Russia, by the way. Even in the midst of the fight over Ukraine, Russia is working to help hold Iran accountable and get a favorable agreement, as is China. And then we have Germany, France, Great Britain, all at the table, all is equally concerned about where this goes. Then you have all the countries in the region, Turkey, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Emiratis, Kuwaitis, Jordanians. They all have a stake in this. So we're not flying by the seat of our pants, nor are we proceeding in a solo basis here. And everybody understands the implications of the potential of their having a nuclear weapon. Israel's not the only country. Others worry about it. So they all want to see that we are trying to negotiate an agreement which will meet a high standard of accountability and eliminate the 4 pathways to a bomb. The Natanz pathway, the Iraq pathway, the Fordow pathway, and then, of course, the potential of a covert pathway. Now, that's complicated. We have to proceed, but you have to also measure this, I say carefully, against alternatives. Presumptions may be being made here by some people that there's an alternative way that you somehow get them to, it's like Men in Black. You can hold up a little flash pen and flash it, and they'll forget everything they've learned about fuel cycle or nuclear weapons or nuclear production, peaceful nuclear production. You think that's going to happen? Is there any notion of reality in anybody's mind that says that we're going to negotiate a deal where they have eliminated all of their know-how? And if you don't have verification and if you don't have insight as to what they're doing, there's a greater likelihood they dig deeper under a mountain and do something that you don't know. And you wake up one day and boom, They do have something. So you got to ask yourselves, what are the real alternatives here? I hear people talk about dismantlement. I mentioned the Bush administration from 2003 on, where their deal was no enrichment, but they just enriched away, and they centrifuged away, and they went from 164 to 19,000. They did that while they had sanctions, while there was a prohibition on the policy, while there was a UN resolution. And so you got to stop and say, what is the best way to be able to guarantee they don't get a bomb for the period of time to build to the future as we begin to change a lot of other things, hopefully. Now, I'll tell you this. I'm not going to go into all of it now. I want us to see if we have a deal before I put all the arguments out there. But I'm telling you, there are many more arguments than have been heard about why this is important, and there are many more arguments than you will probably hear next week. And we need to wait and see what deal we have before you can really measure what it is that is at stake here and what the options are and how you feel about it.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. We've run out of question time. Mrs. Lowy has an issue she'd like to bring up.
I don't think we have time to discuss it today, but I'd like to pursue it. I know Andy Lack was just appointed head of the BBG, a talented person, very capable. I know that you're investing $5 million, as announced by the president, in public relations. We have failed. We have lost this war, and I don't get it. As a proud member of Congress, as a proud American, I don't understand why we can't communicate it more effectively. I've been asking this question for a very long time. We are losing the public relations war, and I think it's so important we can't discuss it today. And I don't understand why it's called the Counterterrorism Communications Center. Is a $5 million program. We have $742 million in program done by BBG. Together, I think we should figure out how we can be more successful. The president brought this up at the conference last week, and I'd love to get a briefing and understand why we're losing this public relations.
Well, I want to give you, I really want to engage in that discussion with everybody. Russia Today can be heard in English. Do we have an equivalent that can be heard in Russian? That's a pretty expensive proposition. They're spending huge amounts of money with speaking languages that other people understand and putting out information that other people understand in other countries around them, and we're not. We are beginning now to do this with respect to ISIL, and so we're putting out things in Urdu, we're putting out things in Somalia, we're putting out things in Arabic. But this is a big enterprise, folks. I'm all for it. President's all for it. But it takes money. And we've got to be prepared to invest in sort of that kind of marketing, if you will, and the penetration. What we have allocated now under BBG goes to Radio Free Asia, it goes to TB, Marti, it goes to all these various entities. It's split up. While the real challenge is not as much there, to be honest with you, as it is in some of these other places. So we'll all agree we ought to sit down and rethink it, recommit, figure out how we're going to do this most effectively. We haven't cornered the market on the wisdom of that, but you're right. Andy Lack is a very capable guy. We're hopeful that we're going to have a rejuvenation of that effort, and we're sure to come back to you and talk to you about some of the ways we could try to augment our initiatives.
Let me just say in conclusion, because we're not going to have the discussion today, Walter Isaacson is a pretty talented guy, too. He headed it for a couple of years before.
Very talented guy.
We somehow have failed here, and I'd be interested
I'll tell you what,
in having
I'll
a
commit
serious
to come back to you
discussion.
with a program that will lay out together with all of those folks you've just named a stronger approach on this, and I hope we can have a meeting of the minds on it. Madam Chairwoman, with your indulgence, can I just say that we remain as deeply committed now as I was in the very beginning to trying to work something between Palestinians and Israelis. It's been made very, very difficult by virtue of the Palestinian accession to the ICC, which we strongly advised them not to do and said would be acting against their own interest and the interests of a long-term resolution. As everybody knows, there is a critical election in Israel in the next weeks. We are assiduously not engaged and do not want to get in the middle of that. It's up to the people of Israel to make their own decision. Our hope is, however, that when that decision is made and a government comes together, we will have an opportunity to get back to the real work of peace and of finding a road forward. And the United States is deeply committed to that as before, and we're working right now to help make sure the Palestinian Authority doesn't collapse because of the lack of revenues and the stress that they're under. But make no mistake, that remains a major priority of many nations in the region, and I hear it wherever I go.
Mr. Secretary, as we adjourn the meeting, I have a request. Last year, the House established the Benghazi Select Committee. It's in all of our best interests for the Select Committee's work to be completed as soon as possible. So your assistance in ensuring sufficient resources are dedicated to respond quickly to the Select Committee's request is appreciated. Thank you again for your time today. This concludes today's hearing.
Thank you so
Members
much.
may submit any additional questions for the record. The Subcommittee on State Foreign Operations related programs stands adjourned. Thank you.